Я думаю, що ми вже
I
можемо починати.
I
Можемо.
think that we can already start.
Okay, great. Okay, so very, very big welcome to everybody. Yeah, thank you for being with us today. It's a really great honor to speak with you today about this important topic, and I'm really happy people took time out of their schedules to discuss this important topic. Just maybe some practical things. So Serhi is with me here from the WHO. They are also the kind organizers and supporters for organizing this webinar. And you will also be supporting me in the chat. So if you have any questions during this talk, please share them in the chat. Maybe Serhi already said. And yeah, the most important thing I think today, I have slides. I have some information prepared, of course, for you today. But also, I know we are a big group, but I try to keep it as interactive as possible, so that the questions that arise with you, or some questions maybe from your personal situation, your personal work, are answered, I hope, by the end of our meeting today. Maybe before we get started, we can go to the next slide, please. I will, yes, thank you. I will say something about the organization that I work for. Maybe some of you know us, maybe some of you don't yet. And I will say something about myself. So I work with ARC International. We are based in the Netherlands, in the capital region. And yeah, we've been partnering with the WHO for a longer time now, WHO in Ukraine. And we've been supporting in sharing information about mental health through webinars. We're giving trainings, but some of you have maybe also spoken to our colleagues for interviews to do a mapping of the MHPSS initiative in Ukraine. And what we do in the Netherlands, but also worldwide, is we focus on the mental health and psychosocial well-being of people affected by war, but also disasters and traumatic events. And we do this abroad, but also in the Netherlands, for instance, with refugees. And also we see a big group of Ukrainian refugees, of course, in the Netherlands, and veterans. For me, myself, so my name is Rina Ghafoerkhan. Maybe some of you saw me for the last webinar. I'm a psychologist working at ARC International for around 15 years now. I also have experience in the humanitarian sector in various countries, for instance, to Doctors Without Borders. And one of my main focus areas has been on sexual violence, and especially conflict-related sexual violence. I completed a PhD research about this, both in the Netherlands and abroad. And I work as a clinician. And next to that, I'm a policy advisor at ARC International. I'm also editor-in-chief of Intervention Journal. Maybe some of you know it, maybe some of you don't. Intervention Journal has been around for 20 years. And what we do is we publish peer-reviewed works, either scientific articles or field reports or personal reflections about people working in MHPSS in humanitarian settings. And our main focus is to really also amplify people working in the field, working in humanitarian settings, and bridging the gap also between what we know in science, maybe what we think of in policy, but also how it lands in the field and vice versa. So also any experience that you maybe have around this or conflict-related sexual violence in the area that you work in would be very welcome also at Intervention Journal for publication. So that's a little bit about me. I know we're way too many people to do introductions about each of you, although I would be very interested. But maybe a quicker way to do that is through Mentimeter. So I've prepared a little slide so I can get a little sense, and we can get a little sense of who is in the audience. So maybe I will share that, and the PowerPoint can be stopped for one moment. So there we are. So I think you can join the Mentimeter now by entering the code that is on top, if you're able. If you're not, please let us know in the chat and we can see a way to support this. And if you could please enter, how do you identify? Maybe I just chose some categories, so maybe there are many categories I forgot. Do you think I identify as a practitioner, so meaning I am, somebody who directly work with people. I'm maybe a psychologist or a social worker or a counselor. I'm directly involved with delivering services to people, or I'm more of a policymaker. I work in NGOs. I work on project management. I'm more a person who's overseeing those processes rather than implementing myself. Maybe you're a researcher, I don't know. And maybe you're somebody who does something that doesn't fall under any of these categories. Okay, here's two responses, just giving a few moments for others to respond. And if it's challenging to use the Mentimeter, I know sometimes people can find issues there. Please also feel free to put it in the chat if that's the easier option for you. I see Alla is here. Nice. Hi, Alla. Good. Oh, we have many practitioners. I see one policymaker. Good. Yeah. Okay, so I see there's a lot of experience actually with directly working with people. Yeah, well, that's nice to know. So I know I'm talking to at least some part of the audience who are directly meeting people and maybe also meeting survivors. So I'll go to the next slide. Maybe some of you are already there, because my next question is, do you have experience in working with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence? And we'll talk more about what that is. So either you say, well, yes, it's something I do on a daily basis. It's the core of the work I'm delivering. Or you have some experience. You sometimes encounter people, or you have little experience. Everything is fine, of course. Or you say, well, this is really my first time to really delve into this topic. And this will help me also, of course, to shape what we will discuss today a bit. Little experience. I see also something's coming up in the chat. Okay.
Yes, people in the chat, they are texting that they either mainly have little experience or no experience at all. Some of them have hands-on experience.
Okay, super. Yeah. And we have another PhD I can see in the in the chat. That's the English one I can understand. Good. Okay. That's good to know. And for those that work with survivors daily, please also feel free in the chat to, based on what I'm sharing, also share your knowledge that you bring to this topic. And I see, a lot of people stepping new into this topic. Okay, that's helpful for me to know. So if I will stop sharing this for now. I will come back to the Mentimeter later, but if we can pull up the slides again. Yeah, if we can go to the fourth slide, please. To the fourth slide, please. Yeah. No, one back. The first. So one. Yeah, thank you. So maybe a little recap, because this webinar is building on the previous one, and maybe some of you have seen the recording, maybe some of you were there, but just to make sure we're all caught up, I'll do a little recap of webinar one. And basically what we discussed there was there is an undeniable link between war, conflict, and the increase of sexual violence in all levels, right? Like, so related to the conflict, but also, yeah, related to other dynamics. And we went into that, why and how, and yeah, there are many factors to list, of course, but in many cases, it's yeah, the conflict happening, the war happening, and the parties involved, it's also played out in how we see sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence happening. So it's a aggressor against the population that's being aggressed that is also reflected in the sexual violent act. And of course, the whole situation, the state of impunity is also leading to that. And moreover, it's also used as a weapon of war. And I think, well, many people in the audience might have heard something about that in Ukraine as well. And we'll talk a bit about that as well today. Then we went a bit in depth on, okay, what do people experience during the sexual violence, right? So many things, of course, but there were two things that we highlighted. And one of them was tonic immobility, and it's the phenomenon that's maybe sometimes not well known. People usually talk about fight or flight. So you fight against the perpetrator or you run away, but actually in sexual violence, that's really not an option most of the time. And also we have these very primary responses in our in our brain, in our old system, in the way our body functions that also makes us freeze, something we call freeze. And beyond freeze, there's even tonic immobility. And it's this phenomenon when people are frozen, but they are completely aware. So this is what happens the most to sexual violence. People who are experiencing sexual violence, so they are frozen, they cannot move, but they are aware of what's happening. And as you can understand, that also leads to a lot of feelings, a lot of confusion. Why didn't I fight? Why didn't I scream? But it's a really involuntary reaction of the body. Then we also talked about arousal non-concordance. And what that means is that because of the high stress in that situation, the body also has a response. Many things happen in the body, of course, but one of them is that there can be a genital response. So in the case of men, this can mean an erection. In the case of women, this can also mean lubrication or getting an orgasm. And you can imagine that is very confusing to survivors. And because it's to many people, of course, this physical response might align with thinking, oh, it means I want it, it means I like it. But this is really what we know from science, from many studies, is that it has nothing to do with wanting it. It's purely a biological response of the body. So we talked about that. And it will be helpful to remember that also for today. Then we spoke a little bit about trauma-informed approaches. So how can we talk to survivors or support survivors in a way that is sensitive to what they have experienced, and in a way that doesn't, without us meaning to, without intention, unintentional, trigger them, relive some of the experience they've had, the sexual trauma steps. So how can we do that in a careful way? So we talked about that. And we also talked about the WHO guidelines about this. It's a report that is it's a bit, published a longer time ago, but I think everything in there is still really relevant. So if you were not there, if you haven't seen the recording, you can go back to that one and also find the resources that were listed for us. So then if we can go to the next slide. So go to the next. Yes. Yes. So today we're going to take it a step further. Okay. So last time we talked about what happens during. Today we will focus really on about what happens after, and from a, of course, psychological mental health perspective we're talking. I will say a little bit about conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine. Yeah, obviously I'm here, you are there, so I'm sure you will also have maybe heard through media, through your in your personal how do you say, in your personal circle, you might have heard about incidences of sexual violence in Ukraine. I will share something about some reports that have been published about it and what do we know from those reports. Then we'll talk a bit about the aftermath of sexual violence, and there will be also a focus on male survivors. And then we will go a bit into theory about how are traumatic memories stored. So I'll discuss a bit about that. And with a special focus on conflict-related sexual violence, of course. And we'll give some examples about trauma-focused therapies, and how they address these trauma, the way traumatic memories are stored. And then we'll have some time for questions. Okay, so maybe for now, check with Sergi. Are there for now any questions or comments in the chat that I need to be aware of or that need to be addressed before we move on?
Зараз ще немає.
For now, we do not have any questions.
Виключно про запис першого вебінару.
There are only questions about the recording of the first webinar, but we will share the link once again.
Yes, super. Yes, yes. Okay, then we'll continue to the next slide. Yes. So this is Sabine, and she's the UN Women representative in Ukraine. I think, but still so, but in any case, she was. And I have here a quote that says, as for conflict-related sexual violence, it's important to note that the government of Ukraine immediately recognized it as a serious issue and as a serious violation of the rights of women, men, and I would say like girls, boys as well. And attention to gender equality issues in Ukraine has helped the country to respond promptly to the problem of conflict-related sexual violence and to counter it. And although it's really not easy or nice to think about sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence, I think it is really something, to be, in a way, it sounds maybe strange, what I will say, but to be proud that this was the response in Ukraine, because I've worked on this topic for a long time, also in other settings that have been affected by conflict and war. And I think in Ukraine, at least from the public debate, I can see there is the space in Ukraine to acknowledge this problem. And I think that is very special and very important, and something to nurture and be proud of as a nation. And of course, it doesn't mean it's perfect. When we're talking about sexual violence, there's always so much still to do and so much still to gain. And for an individual survivor, there are still many challenges, of course, to also find help and to speak out. It's not perfect, but it's a very important start that is present in Ukraine. In other countries I've worked, there's complete denial about sexual violence. It is not part of the public debate in times of war or conflict, and I think I can see a difference there in Ukraine. At least it's being recognized. It's being recognized as a weapon of war. And I think also speaking to many survivors and also survivors who've become advocates for their issue, for their cause, this kind of recognition is so crucial to healing. And we'll speak a little bit more about that, but I think it's such an important start. So I will, if we can go to the next slide. I've put some QR codes. Of course, you will receive these slides as well, but there are some quotes here to, really nice reports that have come out, really specifically related to Ukraine. So the first one is a report that's specifically on male survivors and also on people from the LGBT community who live through sexual violence. Then the middle one is a strategy for the prevention and response of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine. And the last one is actually where the quote came from that I just shared from UN Women Combating Violence Against Women. So it's a bit more broad, talking about violence, but also conflict-related sexual violence. And I think all these reports are they're just really great resources. They're really well done. They're really focused, on the Ukrainian setting in particular. And then there's one more, if we can go to the next slide, that I want to delve into a little bit deeper. Yes, thank you. So this is a study. It's actually done a while back, and in this study they've interviewed survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, but these survivors had experienced this violence in 2014, so a while back. But sometimes that's also what it takes this time to be able to speak about it and reflect on it. And I think the findings from this study can still inform us today. I hope you also find it interesting. And here's the QR code to the report. You can find it there. And this here now is English, but there's also a Ukrainian version. And I quickly want to highlight also the initiator and funder of this research. There are many. Their logos are listed there, but one of them is the Global Survivor Fund. And this is if you're interested in this topic, it's a really worthwhile initiative to look into. So it was started from the Denis Mukwege Foundation, and Denis Mukwege is a gynecologist, doctor from Congo. And he, at that time in Congo, was doing pelvic reparation surgeries for survivors, and he won the Nobel Prize with this. And what he did is and his organization, of course, started a global survivors network. And these are, it's really, really, global from all sorts of conflicts. They have people who speak up for the rights of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And they also have a big department in Ukraine, and they're very active in advocating for the rights. So they could be really interesting to look at the website and the work that they do. So moving to the next slide. So this is just a quick overview. So they've interviewed 5 male survivors, 22 female survivors. Can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. That's helpful. So they kept it an open interview. 1 out of 3 interviewed female detainees was a survivor of sexual violence. So compared to 1 out of 4, which are both shocking numbers, right? Like it's huge numbers. This is this study, but if we would translate it to a wider population, we're speaking about big numbers of survivors. And so the main things they had experienced was forced nudity, sexual torture, rape, and genital injury. And under the other category are listed sexually comments, like comments that make people feel ashamed regarding sexuality. And if you look at the last graph, it says the impact, right, it had on the survivor. So first of all, psychological, that's why we're here today, but also impact on family and society. And we'll speak a little bit about that as well. Medical, physical, economic, and other impacts. So the first 2 will be our focus of today, and we can see that's actually also the impact that people described from these experiences. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Maybe skip through again to thank you. That will save some time. So the first one, the top right one. So here are some quotes that people gave from the interviews that were done, and I just want to share them because I think they are, of course, always very touching to hear these very honest experience people have that survive sexual violence, and and I think it can give us some insight in to start off our conversation today. So the first one on the top right says, "I woke up every night from some kind of nightmare and screamed in the middle of the night. And on the third night, my husband told me in a rude way, 'I can't live like this. What's this? I can't live like this. Get a grip, do something, and stop behaving like that. I can't sleep at night because of you.'" And I think so. There's a lot to unpack there, of course. So first of all, this person had nightmares and screamed in the middle of the night. So something we call night terrors. But also, what's in this quote is the support, in this case, lack of support from the husband. And we can't blame this husband, I think, because also so it happens to the survivor, but it also happens to the family and the direct people in somebody's life, right? So it's hard to deal with that from the surroundings. And of course, there can be all sorts of advice and what would be the good way, but it is a challenge when something painful like this happens and there's so much associated with this sexual violence. It's hard for people to respond. It's hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand the psychological impact as people start to behave strange, let's say, strange quotation marks. They are a burden on their maybe surroundings. They become different persons from how they used to be, and it's something the surrounding has to adapt to, and that's hard. That's a challenge. So we'll speak a bit about that as well today. Then on the left side it says, "An acquaintance of mine recommended a psychologist to me, but they are $500, so it's around $16 per session. I don't have the opportunity to pamper myself like that." So I think this is speaking into something else, which is also very relevant, is that who has access to care? Yeah, so I've been working with some Ukrainian colleagues for a longer time, and I understand it's there is no everything is private, right? Like in terms of mental health, there is no public funding or free access to mental health care, as I understand from our Ukrainian colleagues. And first of all, I think for our colleagues in Ukraine, it's very challenging to work in that way. But of course, also for the ones that need, most of all, for the ones that need support. And that includes survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. There is a barrier to care. And actually, this person is saying, I don't have such an opportunity to pamper myself like that. So it's like it's a luxury product to have mental health care. And of course, that's, I think people in the audience agree. And I'm a psychologist, so I agree. But it should not be a luxury product, right? It's a basic need to be mentally well, a basic human need. And it's very challenging if that means it's dependent on your income. And then the one on the right in the middle, it says, "It just humiliates people. It humiliates people. They laughed at the fact that I was not quite well dressed there. It simply humiliates the person." So we'll speak about that as well, about the impact of sexual violence and the humiliation of it. Then on the bottom, I said, "I had some intolerance of my body at some point. Couldn't handle it. Couldn't take my body completely naked. Normally, somehow it was strange. I was ashamed to look at myself." Yeah, so really, this one and the humiliation one really speak about, such a subtle almost impact on how it's not just something that happens to your body in the moment. It's not just something that is about the fear of it or the flashbacks. I will talk a bit about that as well. But it's also it violates you. It violates how you think about yourself. It violates your dignity. It violates your relationship to your body. So it has very subtle, big outcomes. So we'll discuss some of that as well. And some of these are really hard to put into words. That's why I like these quotes, because it takes a long time usually for people to be able to say, what am I feeling? What did it do to me? Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So now we'll transition into really going a bit deeper into what is the impact of conflict-related sexual violence from a psychological perspective, of course. If we can go to the next slide. Yes. So great, you translated all of that. It's nice to see. We should get it from you, actually, because we use this one a lot, but I don't have a Ukrainian version. Yeah, so this is the ecological model. It's not related to conflict sexual violence, but it's a model we sometimes, or a theory we use to explain, lots of things. But mainly, so it was developed by Bronfenbrenner and in 1979. And it nicely displays the individual and the context. And I think, in thinking about conflict-related sexual violence, it's a nice model, because it is so linked to the context. So first of all, we have the individual in the middle. Then we have something called the microsystem. And that's basically everybody a person is in direct contact with, right? Like, so it's the family, the friends, the child care center, neighbors, workplace. Yeah. So this one is used a lot for explaining children and families, but I think it works on all levels, so also for adults. And so you are in direct contact with a lot of people, and those are your microsystem around the individual. Then we have the mesosystem and the exosystem. And there we talk about, so the mesosystem is like a little bit your wider social community. So it's not people you are in contact with on a daily basis, but it's the larger system you are part of. And the exosystem is like extended family, political, local policies like municipality, community services, media. So it's the system you exist in, basically. Then we have the macro system that's even farther away, right? Like you're very much influenced by it, you're part of it, but it's not something you are in direct contact with usually. So it's like it also has a bit of time to it. So we have the political system, the economic system, culture, social norms. So these are very, and you say they also expand over time, right? Like, so it's really like, for instance, social norms, for instance, in Ukraine, like they don't change week to week, right? Like they're there for maybe a longer period of time, and they can change, but the change is slow. Same for political system, economical system, the change is slower. So, but why do we talk about all of this? Because it's a bit theoretical and it's a bit, broad. But I think it's, in the case of sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence, it really helps us to understand what a person is going through, the individual, because it's not an individual. It is an individual experience, but it's the why it happens and the aftermath of why it happens is very much ingrained in all these layers, and we'll unpack that a little bit. If we can go to the next slide. So, so we start with the macro system. And so this is cultural and societal, right? So, so I said a little bit about that, right? So for conflict-related sexual violence, it's so deeply embedded in structural and gender inequalities. So we know, of course, men can be survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and they are. But women are more often victimized. And even in the case of men, there is always a gender lens to it. but also other inequalities, right? Like, so people who maybe are living in poverty are at higher risk. And so there are many structural reasons why a person becomes victimized. And I've listed here the patriarchy, so gender inequalities. But patriarchy is not only like men against women, but it's also men that are maybe less masculine, or they are, but it's used against them. So there is a gender by relation to why the sexual violence takes place, and it's also for people who identify as LGBTQ, for example. Also, there the patriarchy, because it's less safe for them to be. There can be that can put them at risk for sexual violence. Yeah, and I can speak more about that. But also, of course, the reason why we're here today is because of war and conflict. So that can normalize or weaponize sexual violence. So this is also the macro system. Because there is a war, more sexual violence is happening, and certain groups that are maybe already targeted by the war itself are also at risk of sexual violence. So it goes hand in hand, basically. So this is all part of it. But then again, also when we talk about the aftermath, these same systems that make it more likely for the sexual violence to occur also make it more likely that it's difficult for the survivors to get recognition and get support, because the very system that created the ground for the sexual violence is also stopping people from getting recognition as a survivor, or getting to be taken serious as a survivor. The same is for the legal system. So definitely in times of war and conflict, it's hard to criminalize and prosecute, and that can lead to impunity. But even in times of peace, it's really hard to get legal justice for survivors of sexual violence. Even let's compare to the Netherlands for one moment. Out of everybody that files a report for sexual violence, so everybody, only 0.5% of those files against the perpetrator get sentenced in court. Yeah, so 0.5% of cases. They go to court, maybe they don't go to court because there's not enough evidence, so they stop, and then they go to court, and then from there only 0.5%. So that's just to illustrate it's a huge problem regardless of peacetime or wartime, but especially in wartime it's even worse. So there's impunity, so it means there are no repercussions for this, which makes it more likely for sexual violence to occur, but also makes it more likely for survivors to, because of lack of justice, because of lack of recognition, the mental health is also affected. Yeah. Well, then there are cultural taboos maybe around sexuality, gender roles that can silence survivors, right? Like there can be victim blaming, there can be all sorts of stereotypes about sexual violence, and it doesn't do justice to what people experience. There can be lack of support. So all of that can make the ground for sexual violence and make the ground for a more difficult mental health aftermath of sexual violence. And we talked a little bit already about the strategically use of sexual violence, right? Like, so it sounds very cruel, but it is a very effective weapon of war, right? Sexual violence. It doesn't require bullets. It doesn't require big airplanes and tanks. So it's easy to use sexual violence, easy in terms of material or stuff like that. And the impact is immense. It's immense on the person. It's immense on installing fear. It's immense on breaking up families. It can cause people maybe to withdraw, stay inside, be afraid. So that means it's a very effective weapon, and that's why it's being used so often. That's on the macro system. Are there questions so far? Maybe I check in with Sergey again.
У чаті наразі питань немає.
There are no questions in the
Багато
chat for
повідомлень
now.
щодо
There are
якості і змісту
a lot
презентації.
of messages about the quality of the presentation and about the content. Your presentation is incredible.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. That's very encouraging for me to continue. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, so then we can move on to the next slide. Yes. So this is the exosystem. Yeah. So it means institutional system. So it's already a bit more, how do you say, like, yeah, we're looking at the broader picture before, and now we're looking a bit more directly into institutions a person is in relation to. So we talked about local, like the municipality, community health service, media, extended family. So it's healthcare, it's justice, it's education. So it's also us, right? It's also us as mental health professionals. So we're part of this ecosystem for the survivor, and it's an important part. But what we see a lot is that usually these systems, not usually, but in many cases, the systems are maybe inaccessible. We saw that from the quote. Maybe it's expensive to go there. Maybe this center is, I don't know, you have to drive for an hour to get to the good center that can give you the support. And maybe when you get there, maybe they are understaffed, maybe they're unequipped, maybe they are really great helpers there, professionals, but they are not able, they don't have the right knowledge, or they feel insecure about supporting survivors of sexual violence. Yeah, so these are all big risk for the person to get the help that they need. And yeah, as a result of that, of course, the mental health needs are difficult to meet or address. And the real risk of it is that when, not many people speak out, not many survivors speak out, not many survivors seek help. And then when they finally do, and they find that, they don't get the support they expected, or people even maybe don't believe them, or are not supportive, are victim blaming, then it's very discouraging for survivors, right? And it might be the first and the last time they seek help and ask for support, and then they carry this with them for a long, long time, and that's very harmful. So yeah, preparedness on these levels is very important, and I think we're doing a bit on that today. So and we can educate ourselves more also with the resources listed. So we're taking a little step there today. That's really great. So there can be indifference, victim blaming, corruption, and basically it can be harmful if we are not prepared and ready to support. Again, this allows impunity, right? So healthcare, justice, and education is not responding properly. And the last point is, I think, what I said. So fail to protect or support survivors can compound the trauma and undermine recovery, and that's the real risk. And also the same for education. So I think we won't speak so much about that today, but I think there's a huge role in educational systems, in schools, in universities, to be mindful of it. Maybe it's sometimes challenging to explicitly speak about these topics, but at least, maybe if teachers are trained to recognize some signs sometimes, or at least know where they can get the support, if maybe some student discloses, or they are noticing certain behaviors in the students, and at least they know where to go. So I think there's a huge opportunity there as well in schools. Okay, we can go to the next slide, maybe. Yes. So this is the meso system, and that means the layer where people are in direct contact with. Yeah, so the community and the social networks. And yeah, we discussed, of course, through the war and so yeah, in times of war, these are usually very destabilized. So, or people are maybe displaced, so they are away from the community and the networks that they used to have. So this is what we call something like they lose their social fabric. This is a terminology that is used for that. So they move away, and maybe before they knew where to go. They were part of communities, part of networks, maybe religious groups, and that has been disrupted. Maybe they find new ways, but these are new and maybe less known. So that's a huge problem in times of war. But also sometimes those networks can again be unsupportive, so there can be stigma and silencing that can isolate survivors and reinforce shame. And the war itself can fracture social cohesion, but also disclosing sexual violence can fracture social cohesion. So what is happening really often, unfortunately, is that the shame of what has happened lays with the survivor, right? So the survivor is carrying the burden of what has happened and the shame of what has happened, and not the perpetrator. And yeah, unfortunately, more than often, the survivor gets looked at differently, maybe seen as difficult, maybe seen as maybe you provoked, maybe you were not careful, maybe you're lying. So these questions land with survivors, and the problem and impact of that is huge. So even from many studies and also stories from survivors, we know that I think one survivor recently told me, for me, the worst thing was not the rape, it was how people responded after the rape. And that has been more painful because it was my friends, was my family, blaming me, not supporting me, actually taking the side of the perpetrator. And so that was more damaging than the rape itself. If people would have supported me, I would have been able to heal. Yeah, so just to say how important that layer is of community and social networks. It can also have economic repercussions. So if this comes out for survivors, they might lose their means to livelihood, or but also because of the aftermath of sexual violence, they might be less able to work. So it has repercussions there as well. And violence becomes a tool to destroy communities. We talked about it being an effective weapon of war, right? So we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so now we come to the really close layer around the individual. So this is really the people who are in your direct life. So your colleagues, your parents, your family, your friends, your neighbors. And yeah, again, the impact there can be big. Yeah, so people may face rejections, shame, or blame for family and partners. And it has a huge impact on a marriage, of course, as you can imagine, both from a male survivor or female survivor. Because, like I said, and what also became clear from the quotes, if you remember, if a person changes, and that has an impact on the whole family. In marriages, maybe the person is not able to be intimate with their spouse, which of course has an impact. But also, many times survivors don't disclose. So all of a sudden, a person changes, becomes withdraw, or becomes aggressive, even, or doesn't want to be intimate anymore. So people notice something different, but they don't know the story maybe behind it, because the person is having a difficult time disclosing for many reasons. And it has a huge impact on the relationship, and have an impact on the role as a parent. It's maybe people feel unsafe. They project this on the children, or they become less available as a parent because they are so much in the mental health problem, and you become less responsive, less available as a parent, or you again have difficulty intimacy, difficulty hugging your child. There's really big repercussions there as well. And then a little side note about children born out of conflict-related sexual violence. This is also something, again, we can spend a webinar talking about that. But of course, sometimes from the sexual violence, a pregnancy can happen. And children are born out of rape. And this has, again, many, many, many repercussions. So of course, sometimes people may choose to terminate the pregnancy. That's, of course, an option. People may choose to put the child up for adoption. But many women also choose to keep the child. And I've seen it in many ways. So for some women, they have no complexity to it. This is my child. I love my child unconditionally. It's my child. So that I see really great examples of that, luckily. But in some cases, it can also be very complicated. It can be complicated if it's known for the family. So this is a child that came from a rape that maybe came from an enemy. So half of the child is from the enemy DNA, the enemy personality, the enemy culture, and it's hard to accept your child. It can also be very difficult for the mother to feel attachment to the child because it's so mixed with the trauma. So maybe the child is a boy, maybe the child looks like the father. It's very triggering for the mother, and it can have really difficulties in the attachment and the response to the child. And it's something we work on as well with women at our center to talk about these things. And it can later on, if the child is bigger, also, of course, have many repercussions for the child. So the child can have questions. Who is my father? Where is he? What happened? And later on, if maybe the child learns the truth, there can be questions. Well, am I a bad person? I wasn't wanted. So it's a very complex situation. It can be. But like I said, I've also seen really examples where the mother is able to see that separate from the child that is before her. And they find a way to make a connection. Okay, so all of this has also been focused on the complexities of it, right? But I must also say, when it works, when people are not rejecting, shaming, blaming, and when people are supportive, of course, this also happens. I have to say the positive sides as well. This happens, and this is hugely important. There can be anybody, like a mother, a friend, who says, "I believe you. I'm here for you." It can also be a teacher, a doctor, family doctor, anybody. And when the person discloses there is support, this is hugely healing, hugely healing. Then it can really begin the process of healing, right? Like if you have somebody supporting you, it's so important. When there are systems in place, when there is a teacher that recognizes something in the child and maybe refers the child, when somebody chooses to disclose, and there is a police officer at the office who says, who is believing, who is being supportive, who is doing their best to get justice for this survivor. It's hugely important, hugely healing. And those examples are also plenty. And it's possible. And we need to all create more opportunity for positive, responsive, and support for survivors. Okay, so we've landed to the individual. So the white circle. And that is about the individual. But before I talk about that, I want to hear a bit from you. So we will go to the Mentimeter again. It's the same one. So if you're already in there, you can click. And the question to you, maybe you stop sharing and I share again. So the question to you is, what kind of impact does conflict-related sexual violence have on the individual? We're talking about the individual now. We've landed to that bubble of the individual. So this is really open, okay? So it can be on any area of functioning, but what maybe from you working with survivors, or you having in your personal life some people that you know who have lived through this, or maybe you have lived experience yourself. I'm sorry about that if you do, if you have lived experience yourself of conflict-related sexual violence. What does it look like? You can respond Ukrainian, English, doesn't matter. Yeah, so what have you seen? And if you have no idea, you can also talk about what do you think? What would you expect the impact to be? And again, you can use the chat if Mentimeter is complex for some reason. I see disease is death, also in the chat. Yeah. Can you explain the death part, Natalia? Do you mean like suicide or just killing? Could the translator translate some of the?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Suicide, social isolation, suicide, social withdrawal.
Thank you. Give a few more moments. And for the translator, what is in the chat for the last two comments?
Okay, so it can be the alcohol or drug abuse of the survivor, the loss of trust towards people, traumatic memories, substance use disorders, suicide, failure to accept themselves and others, disruption in sexual desire.
Yeah.
Probably if a female survivor has gone through this experience, she will not be able to have children in the future, and because of this, she might develop different psychological disorders, depression, or have high anxiety.
Okay, and in the Mentimeter, I think you've translated everything, right? Or is there
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. I think this is such a complete list. It has many things, and I'm really noticing that you are also already much aware of all the social implications, right? Like, so it's also how you relate to others, and I think, well, for many traumas this is true, but especially for sexual trauma, yeah, we call it an interpersonal trauma, right? Like, so it's between two people or one, more people, but between people. And that does so much. So it's so much beyond only the act of the sexual violence, but it's also about like it's being represented in your answers. It does something with how you view other people, about your trust, about your confidence, about your ability to build relationships. So I'm really appreciating you already bringing those topics to the surface as well. Yeah, ability to build perception of the world, indeed. Yeah. Yeah, good. This is such a beautiful, complete list, and very sad list, of course, at the same time. Okay, I think we can go back to the slides because I think we have gathered the responses. If you have more to add, please add. We will also share the outcomes of this Mentimeter. So we can go to the next slide.
There is another answer, which is infertility, lack of trust, self-isolation, substance use. That's it.
Thank you. I think the next one. Yes. Yeah, so here's what I had prepared, and yeah, I can already see you've given me more ideas because I didn't put substance abuse, which is actually, yeah, you're absolutely right. That is a big outcome as well. So what I had listed before we spoke, so yeah, first of all, there are these, I would say, like feelings, and then I divide between mental health complaints and the feelings. But of course, the feelings are part of many mental health complaints and mental health disorders. But first of all, what I see is very typical for people who survive sexual violence, conflict-related sexual violence, is this self-stigmatization, which I call. So it's this idea of, we talked about all these layers, right? So this is being done on the outside, but of course we are part of that larger circle. We are part of the system. So automatically survivors know, I cannot say this. There will be bad repercussions for me. So they self-stigmatize, they self-silence. And yeah, all the existing ideas there are about sexual violence and survivors, they already give to themselves. Well, they maybe ask themselves questions of, oh, why did this happen to me? How could I prevent it? It's my fault. I shouldn't have gone there. So it's the self-stigmatization part. There's shame, so much shame. And I think it was said in the quotes in the beginning, right? There's this sense of humiliation. Yeah, the shame also has so much to do with somebody taking something from you. So you feel taint in a way. I don't know if this is a good word, but you feel like you're dirty in a way. It's like somebody has stolen something for you. So there's a lot of shame to be as a person after sexual violence is what I see a lot. And of course, the guilt, I spoke a little bit about that. So it's a lot of questions of self-blame, but maybe also guilt about the consequences. So because of this, I'm not a good mother, or because of this, I lost my job, or because of this, I made all these problems now in my marriage. So there's a lot of guilt also about the aftermath of the conflict-related sexual violence. And disgust is a very big one. And so the acts of sexual violence are often very disgusting as well. So there can be smells of the perpetrator. There can be, of course, yeah, body fluids, and yeah, often because survivors can feel so disgusted by what happened and also disgusted by themselves. Like, I'm now a person who's been violated. They have this disgust in them. A lot of people experience signs of like having a lot of nausea, difficulty eating because of this nausea. It's really this feeling of disgust. And I think we can all somehow relate, like when you've seen like somebody puking, or you've seen puke, or you smell puke, we all have that disgust reaction, right? I think we can all relate, or yeah, you have that strong smell in you. And I think it's kind of similar to how sexual violence survivors feel, but about themselves, about what happened. It's this feeling of deep disgust against something. Lack of trust, I think you also already showed that you understand this consequence. Lack of trust in yourself. I don't trust myself. I'm a person who makes bad choices, but also loss of trust in the other. of course, the loss of sense of safety, because it's so shocking, usually, this event, that you feel, I cannot go outside anymore, this can happen again, I feel so unsafe. And fear of victimization, it's linked to that, of course, it can happen again. Maybe starting to avoid certain places, certain people, like men or people in uniforms. And there is the disconnect from the body. I think that was also shown in the first quote, right? So you something really bad happened with your body that you didn't want. So you feel like your body is not yours anymore. I'm not the one in control over what happens in my body, and my body is a place of pain. And so you start to feel detached from your body. When maybe you can imagine, if you have a good relationship with your body, you feel, oh, I like my body, I take care of my body. If somebody hugs me, I feel nice in my body. And this is really the opposite of that. And you start to because of that, detach a bit from your body, like, oh, it's just a thing that's annoying, that's not mine. And I think that is a bit related also to some of the things said in your answers. I think there's a link also there to substance abuse. So, of course, there are many reasons for substance abuse. And from ARC International, we will organize actually another webinar that will be about substance abuse. So we'll talk more about it there. My colleague will. But I think here, in the case of sexual violence, again, there are many reasons, but I think one important reason specific to sexual violence is also to stop feeling. Because usually people feel so much in the body after sexual violence, they try to detach, but of course it's not working. So these bodily sensations keep coming up, and substances help to regulate that, help to bring down the tension, help to bring down the connection from the body. Because, like, maybe as you know from using certain drugs, people can become very detached from the body, that they start floating somewhere in some area of fantasy. And I think, it's a way of forgetting and a way of not feeling. But again, of course, there are many dynamics to substance abuse in itself. Feeling cursed. So sometimes people can feel like, why did it happen to me? It's because, bad things always happen to me. It didn't happen to other people, it happened to me. So there must be something wrong with me. So feelings like that. And isolation, I think you spoke about it as well. So because, all of this, of course, is so lonely, especially if people don't feel in the space to share. It's so lonely. And you start to feel so different from other people, so you start to isolate yourself. It's hard to build relationships. I think it's been mentioned a few times. Then, of course, there's the whole scala of something let's fall under mental health complaints or mental health disorders. So I will talk about at least PTSD in a little bit. So that's one. But there are many. This, of course, depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, dissociation, so the disconnect from the body again. And also, what's not mentioned here actually are eating disorders. That also has a strong link to sexual violence. Because usually eating disorders are about regaining a sense of control over food in this case. And sexual violence survivors especially have lost all control over their body, over their being, in a very violent way, usually. Controlling the eating is a way to regain that control over your life. Then there is a whole range of physical health complaints, which I'm not the expert in, but I know of course, and we won't go into so much today. But I do want to mention them. So it's gastrointestinal. Sorry, it's a very difficult word for me. And urinary tract injuries. So this means everything to do with the bowels and with peeing. Usually there can be, for sure, right after the sexual violence, of course, there can be difficulty with peeing. there can be pain when contracting the pelvic floor, which makes the pelvic floor more tense. So that's the lowest layer muscle of the body, the pelvic floor, one of them, and they become, because of this pain and maybe sometimes even a wound or like a scar in that area, there can become a lot of attention, and that can give many health complaints as well. But sometimes there can also be tearing that actually needs some type of surgery. So these are also important to keep in mind maybe when we encounter survivors. Also, as a mental health professional, we have to be mindful that, well, this is actually also something people might experience. And the other thing is that people can become incontinent, so they cannot hold up their pee. Gynecological or reproductive issues. I think somebody mentioned it as well. Like, of course, this tension to the pelvic floor can be very challenging. People might have difficulty with intimacy. People might get difficulty if they're women, with their periods. And it might be difficult to get pregnant or like that. Of course, there can also be STIs, so sexually transmitted infections. So when you encounter somebody and it's recently happened or longer time ago, it's also important to be mindful of those. But I won't go so much into those for now. And we spoke a little about pregnancy and abortion. It can be very complicated pregnancy and complicated delivery. From the child, from the rape, but also afterwards, just from a physical perspective, can be difficult to give birth for a rape survivor. And then there is the whole social domain of inability to work, complete house chores, or care for children. We spoke about that already a little bit. Okay. That's something I wanted to say about the aftermath. Questions, Serhi? Are we having questions? All clear so far?
No, not yet.
Okay, good. Don't be shy with the questions or sharing something you know from your setting. But then I'll continue to the next slide, because I want to focus a little bit on male survivors. And this is the report that I already spoke about before. Here's the QR code again, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, again, there's much to say about male survivors. So in this graph, we can see how professionals actually think about male survivors and the experience that they had. So the question was like, where do you think it happens? Where do people become victimized, males, by sexual violence? And these were the answers given. So the left one is everybody, all the professionals that were interviewed, and the light purple one is the one are people working with male survivors. So you can see that there is a difference. So for instance, not so many people think it happens at home, who don't necessarily work with male survivors, but the ones working with male survivors see actually, well, 75% of sexual violence takes place in the home. It takes place in captivity by the military, in confinement. Takes place often when interacting with military as civilians. So yeah, we can see the many settings in which sexual violence against men also takes place. And for sure, for those maybe working with veterans or military, it is a problem. Yeah, and it is a problem for males. And there's much to say about it, but I will say this. Yeah, I think most of it is true, the same way it is between male and females in terms of the aftermath. And I will speak a little bit about it later on in my talk. But especially disclosure is more difficult for males. There's still a kind of stereotype around what we think sexual violence is and what it looks like. So there's still a dominant narrative. I don't know, maybe you will correct me for Ukraine, but I can say, just from the academic literature and also from what I know working with people from all over the world here in the Netherlands, is that there is the dominant narrative of it's a young female and there's a strong masculine perpetrator and she fights back, he forcefully pins her down and there's a rape or something like that. And we just know that happens for sure, but there are many different ways this sexual violence happens, and there isn't always a struggle. It doesn't have to be a young female, it can also be an older female. It can be a man with a man. There are also incidences of a female perpetrator with a male victim, and these are things that, that's not what we think when we think about what does sexual violence look like, right? So especially for us as mental health professionals, it's important to be mindful of our stereotypes. And it's not, we all have stereotypes and it's normal. We're human, right? Like we've all been raised with certain narratives in literature, in movies, in media. And so they're with us. So we have our stereotypes. That's fine. It's absolutely fine. But we need to challenge them. Yeah. So we need to look at them, especially as mental health professionals or working on this topic at least, or being interested in this topic. We need to challenge our ideas about what we think a rape looks like. If we can go to the next slide. So here I've listed some resources for you to look up at. So this is about the outcomes of conflict-related sexual violence. So the first one is a general one that's like on worldwide literature. It's a systematic review of qualitative evidence, so narrative evidence. And then the middle one is a resource that is about response. And it gives you a really nice overview of key documents for the response in Ukraine. And the last one, I did a literature research, a small one, into finding, okay, what do we know about conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine? But I couldn't find much, unfortunately. Maybe you have some resources and you can share them with me. I would be really interested. But I did find this last one. It's a study by Capasso, if I pronounce it correctly, in 2021. And it talks about the factors associated with experiencing sexual violence among female survivors in Eastern Ukraine. It's a nice article, so it's a starting point, but I hope there will be more research because I think it's really, in general, we need more research on conflict-related sexual violence, but I think the scale of what is happening now in Ukraine, I think we need to have the evidence from the Ukrainian context and what we can learn from there and how to support survivors. So if any of you is working with this group, please feel inspired to write some of your findings down, even if it's a small writing. I think it will be very beneficial to our understanding of this topic. I'm just looking at the clock, because we are now going into the next part of our meeting, actually. So, Serhi, could this be a good time maybe to take a break? What do you think? Yeah? Shall we do that? I see some nodding heads. Good. Okay, so we'll break for a few moments now. I know you are 1 hour ahead of me, I think, so it will be my 11:30, but you're 12:30, I think, to come back, like in little less than 10 minutes, if that's okay.
Так, вибачте, будь ласка, у мене не було змоги мікрофон
Sorry,
включити,
I
тому я
couldn't turn
Так,
on my
давайте на
microphone. That's
10
why
хвилин, десь
I was
11,
nodding.
може
So let's
35
get back here
повертаємося
at 12:35.
по українському часу, я маю на увазі.
According to the Ukrainian time. For you, it's
Тоді я
11:35.
прошу вас не виходити з
Then,
конференції, щоб потім
dear
не перезаходити.
participants, let's stay in
Всі
this
залишаємось
conference
тут
for us
і
not
побачимо
to
за 10 хвилин.
rejoin it. So let's stay here and
Дякую.
we'll see each other in 10 minutes. Thank you.
We can start again, sorry.
Я все фінксов.
Okay. So I think for now I have to again share the Mentimeter. Wait, one question. So yeah, so we discussed a bit about the aftermath of conflict-related sexual violence. Welcome back, everybody. And next off, we're taking a little side note, as I said, into how traumatic memories are stored. And to get us started on the topic, I have a question for you. I'm so sorry, there's actually still the question on the slides. Sorry, one more time, the slides. For the question to be answered in Mentimeter. Yes, the next one. Yes, there we are. Yeah, so the question is, or actually the situation is, think of something nice that happened to you a longer time ago. So not yesterday or last week, but a longer time ago, but you still remember it very vividly. Yeah, so it's something very alive and strong in you. Yeah? So something nice. We're thinking something nice. And then when you go to the Mentimeter, I can share. You can enter there. How do you feel when you think about this? So what do you experience in your body? Okay, so it's about what does it bring in you when you think about this positive experience? I'll give you a moment.
Smile.
Smile. Warm tenderness, I see in the chat. Yeah.
Joy, happiness. I would like to get back to that moment. Smile, happiness.
Yeah, great. And maybe some people can also reflect on what do you feel in your body? Yeah? Like where or what sensation in your body?
Gratitude.
Gratitude, yeah. And I think there are also some in the chats.
Yes, mainly happiness, smile, and warmth. They are the same.
Yeah.
There are now some answers. I can feel warmth in my body. I can also feel an elevated heartbeat, even coming from positive memories. I can also feel happiness, goosebumps, and warmth.
Nice. It's nice actually to hear all these positive feelings. It's nice to feel them. Feels very pleasant. And I also like the one that said I want to go back to it. So you have like it pulls you a bit, like, oh, I want to go back to that moment in my life. That's very nice. Yeah, warmth in the lower abdomen, also very nice. Yeah. For me, it's always my chest where I feel warmth if I think about something positive. Yeah, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think a lot, we can go back to the slides. And if I can see there's already so much about, yeah, it evokes a lot, let's say. Yeah. So thinking about things that happen in your life, they cause a lot, even now, today. And I think that's the bridge, of course, to what we're talking about today and talking about trauma and sexual trauma. So if we can go to the next slide. And one more. Yeah, so if we think about which clothes did you wear last week, Tuesday? And so we don't have to go to the Mentimeter, but you can take a moment to think about that. And if you're like me, I don't know how you choose what to wear, but for me, I have no idea, right? Like, just have to really think, okay, I have to get out my calendar. I have to think, okay, where was I last week, Tuesday? What could I have worn? And honestly, I really don't know. I don't know. I would really, if I maybe I have a picture of myself that day, I would know, but I wouldn't know how to reproduce that. Yeah. So why do I ask this question? The things that made impact on us. So the event that you just thought or thinking about, that was a happy time in your life. It's very vivid. I hope for some of you, we can also see from the reactions, right? It was even one person described, oh, I have a strong heartbeat. So you really feel so much when you think about this time in your life. But then actually something that happened last week that was maybe not so meaningful, you have no idea. Oh, I don't know what I wear, what I feel. I don't know. So we have days in our life that we don't have memory, right? Like we are getting I don't know your age, but especially the older you get, there are more days where you're like, I have no idea. They just go by, and it's normal, right? Because we cannot keep everything in our brain. We would become crazy. So this is how the memory works. We just, some things it chooses to store, that things that are meaningful, things that are impactful, but the everyday things we forget, and it's a good thing. Because we only have so much space in our brain to remember. Of course, there are some exceptions. People who have a really super good memory and do remember every detail, but most of us, we forget a lot. And that's helpful. And it's also helpful to remember those important times in your life. These are the things that are impactful. So maybe your marriage day, the time you see your child, or you graduate, all these moments in your life that are meaningful, but also like, holidays, things that are different than your usual life. And why are they important to remember? Well, because they shape who we are as a person. Yeah, so they are meaningful in some way. Meaningful, like the day you're married, it's a meaningful day. It's significant in your life, so you remember because it was a huge impact. So they shape who you are, and it also teaches you something. So of course you don't choose yourself. I'm gonna keep this memory, and I'm gonna not keep this memory. No, it's an automatic system, right? But it's a system made for learning. Also, it's also learning. It's like, oh, when this happened, I feel happy. When this happened, I feel fearful. When this happened, I feel sad. So it's also learning. So by really remembering those impactful moments, maybe I don't know, one time you got on your bike, we have a lot of bikes here in the Netherlands, and you fell. So next time you get on your bike, the time after, you remember, like, oh, no, I was speeding that time, so I have to be careful so I don't fall again. Yeah, so by remembering, you are learning. If we can go to the next slide. And I will give you a little bit of theory now about how this works in the mind, in the memory. So if we make it really simple, of course, it's never simple when we talk about brains and memory, but we will make it simple for now for our conversation today. So there are basically two parts to memories. There's what we call cold memory and hot memory. And that means the cold part are facts, are context. So, for instance, when we think about a wedding again, so it was in the summer, it was in this and this place, these and these people were there. I drove there with a car, so it's facts. Yeah, so it's what happened, how did it happen, where it happened, when it happened. Very basic facts. Then we have the hot part of a memory. Yeah, so the one is factual. It's almost like if you've ever seen like a police report, it's only the facts. But the hot memories are, how was that for you? Yeah. It's about what were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were you feeling in your body? But also sensory information. What were you seeing? What were you smelling? What were you hearing? What were you feeling in the touch? What were you tasting? Maybe. Yeah. So all memories have these two elements, and they are stored differently in the brain. Yeah. But and we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so one part, the hot part, is stored in the amygdala. So this is a part of your brain that is responsible for many things, but also for emotions. So it's for feeling emotions now, but it's also for remembering these hot elements, as we call them. So the experience. And then we have the hippocampus that also does many things, but one of them is storing factual information of memories. Yeah, so these are two different brain parts. You have to remember that for what's coming next, okay? So hot amygdala, cold hippocampus, two different brain parts. So if you go to the next slide, this is actually a picture of my holiday. We can wait with that, please. Yeah, because I want to fully explain. Yes, thank you. This is a holiday I had with my family in South Africa, and this is a picture of it. And if we go to one slide further, you will see that information. Yeah, so it was in November 2024. I was in South Africa. It was really warm, and we took a hike that morning. These are facts, okay? Nothing about my experience there. Yeah, maybe the really warm is a bit, but it was kind of a fact because it was like 35 degrees. Yeah. Then next, we have the sensory information. So that's about me experiencing that place, that memory. Yeah. So if we can go to the next slide, the next part. Yes. Thank you. So I could feel the sand under my feet. I see a beautiful beach. I hear the sounds of my children playing. And so it's my ears, my eyes, and the sensory, the touch. And then next. Yes. Yes, thank you. The next is the physiological part. So my breathing was relaxed. I had calm breathing, but I had a sore back from hiking. I carried a strong backpack. So that's my body, my physical shape. And then next. These are my emotions. So I was happy, I was relaxed, but I was also a bit sad from being tired of carrying the backpack. And a bit, even in the moment, I was already a bit nostalgic. I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. And I wish this moment can be forever. So I also had this bit of nostalgic sadness in me. Yeah. And then the next one, my thoughts were, I'm so lucky, I feel at peace. Yeah, so those were my thoughts. Then if we go to the next slide, you can see everything is connected. Yeah, so everything links to each other. Like, for instance, the one that is shaped now is like, I see the beautiful beach. This makes my breathing relaxed, and this makes me feel happy, and I'm so lucky. Yeah? So you can see this is a connection, and it's true for all of them. So all these warm elements of the memory are connected. Yes. They link. And if all is right, so this was obviously not a traumatic experience, so all was right, this also links to the contextual information. Okay, I will talk a little bit about that more in detail next. So we can move ahead with the slides to next one. Because now we're going to talk about the trauma, right? And this is, how does it work in times of trauma? So this, obviously, my beautiful beach was a peaceful time. But how do these traumatic memories work when we talk about, for instance, conflict-related sexual violence? And we can go to the next slide. So as you might have heard or know, there is a fight, flight, freeze response. And last time we spoke about tonic immobility. Is the next slide coming? Yes, there it is. Thank you. And yes, so the reaction, the whole body is then, in a state of alert to survive. That's the most important thing. I think we are very, how do you say that? When it all comes down to it, that is our main goal as a human being. And I think for all animals, the same. So when it comes down to that situation of life and death, and conflict-related sexual violence mainly feels like that, alive in that situation, it's about survival, and the body system takes over to survive. And this is this fight, flight, freeze reaction. When you're surviving, it's less important to know the context, right? It's less like, oh, what kind of weather is it? What kind of shoes is this person wearing? That's not so relevant in that moment to survive. But the sensory information and the bodily information is very important for survival. So you feel intense fear. Very important, because it tells you this is not okay. You need to move out of here. It's unsafe. Your muscles become tense. Your heart starts to beat. Why does your heart start to beat? Like, to pump a lot of blood to your muscles, right? To run, even regardless of whether you can run or not run, your body will prepare to fight and run, and all of that. Yeah, so this whole body reaction starts, and we spoke a little bit about that last time as well. So we can go to the next slide. Here you also see that whole reaction. And then the next slide. Yes. So here you see on the left side the memory. So how well is the memory doing? And you see on the bottom side, you see the stress levels. And we spoke about this already. Yeah. So when something becomes more important, so the stress level goes up, and it can also be positive stress in this case. So it can also be, like we just talked about, your wedding day. Yeah? So you have that stress in terms of arousal. You're alert, you're ready for this big day. So there's a positive amount of stress in you, and can also be negative amount of stress, of course. And the memory function goes up. So the memory becomes better as the stress level raises. Okay? That's why we can remember these important events better. But then if we go to the next, if you click one more, you can see after a while, the memory function becomes less. So the memory how well the memories are stored becomes less effective as the stress levels go up. So there is a tipping point. You see, first it goes up, but then after some point it comes down. If you can click on the slide one more time. I think it should be displayed. Yes. And then one. Yes. Thank you. So there's the trauma. Yeah. So after that part, when we talk about trauma, the stress levels are so high, so intense that we move away from functional stress levels to just, okay, basic core survival skills, right? It's just, a life and death situation. So the memory is like, okay, this is not important anymore. The memory, it's only important to survive, right? So the stress levels take over. It becomes the most important thing, and the memory function goes down. So if you go to the next slide. Okay. So here we're coming back, right? I told you to keep this in mind. So we have the hot part and the cold part. We have the amygdala and the hippocampus. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so again, the hot memories are stored by the amygdala, and then the next part. Next one also. Yes, thank you. And you can see the cold memories are stored in the hippocampus, right? So that we spoke about. And then, as you can see, what happens during stress levels. So the amygdala is becoming extra active, is working amazingly when we talk about what are we experiencing during trauma. But the hippocampus, as we saw from the figure, the memory functioning goes down after some time of intense stress, right? So the hot memories, the hot part of the memory is stored particularly well, and the cold part is stored in a not so good way. And actually, normally they are integrated, but because of trauma, they become segregated. Yeah. And if we go to the next one, we can see an example. Yes, thank you. So hot memories are automatic and associative. We'll talk a bit more about that. So you cannot choose to, maybe somebody remembers like, I don't know, you start to think about eating ice cream or something, your favorite food, and you get water in your mouth. It's mouth watering. Or you smell something and it makes you think of something. So this is very automatic. You don't choose these things, they just happen. And it can be from something you are thinking of or something from the outside, and it's happening now. And it has, as we saw, like sensory, bodily, emotionally. And then the cold memories are deliberate, factual. Yeah, so you can say, if I tell you, oh, think about, I don't know, the day you graduate, you can go there and think about it. Yeah, but you cannot you cannot choose how your body will react, right? So this one is factual, and the other one, or sorry, deliberate, and the other one is automatic. And you can activate it, by thinking about it on demand. And it has all the facts and knowledge of your life experience. So time, place, surroundings, chronology, and context information. Yeah, and if you go to the next one, you can see that trauma breaks that. Yes. So trauma puts a segregation between these things. And because of that, we can compare between common memories, like I call it common memories, so non-traumatic memories, and traumatic memories. And what's the difference? So common memories are coherent, means they make sense, right? They have a beginning, middle, end. They're very logical, usually. And traumatic memories are very vivid. What I mean by that is that they are, I think we also saw it from your responses about the positive thing, even though that was not traumatic, obviously, but it had a strong reaction. And it's the same, even more so for traumatic memories, but they have a strong negative reaction, of course. So they can be very, all of a sudden the fear comes, or all of a sudden this very strong smell comes. So they're very lively, very vivid, and not so cold in the way that you can really reflect on, but you're not personally affected in that moment. Yeah. So they have all these vivid details. And then they're contextualized to common memory. So it means they took place in a certain time. You can reflect on that. Oh, that was 5 years ago. Oh, it was the time I was, I don't know, living in that area. And traumatic memories are very intrusive. They just get to you in an unexpected moment. You don't choose so well. Common memories are integrated. So this is what we talked about. They're integrated between the cold and the warm memory. Yeah, so they're stored together, whereas traumatic memories, they're fragmented. So you have a bit of the memory there, a bit of the memory there, but these pathways are not there. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Common memories can be recalled without distress. We just did that. We just thought about a positive experience, and we can just recall them, but we're not overwhelmed. I hope none of you are overwhelmed. But the traumatic memories are overwhelming. So when you remember them, you cannot work anymore, or you're completely distracted. You feel completely bad. Common memories can fade over time, and like we talked about, right? You cannot remember all of them. They're not meaningful enough. But traumatic memories, they feel like they're happening right now. Yeah. Is there a question in the chat? I see.
No, there is just a question whether the people will be able to receive the presentation.
Oh, yes, for sure. Yes. Okay. Then in the next one, you see actually everything I just said, but integrated into one slide. Yeah. So the past feel like a present moment, or the past, what happened in the past feels like it's happening now, without the integrated cold memories that you see on the bottom left. Yeah. So it's just now. That's why people, when I speak to people who've experienced conflict-related sexual violence, they will tell me it's happening now. Yeah, and I think this is true for many people with traumatic experience. When I talk about it, it's now. There's no difference between it happening then and happening now. So this, yeah, I mean, there are many theories behind it, but one theory is the one I'm explaining now, and it's from the memory perspective. So from the memory theory on trauma, we say it's because it's basically a fault in how the memory is stored because of this amount of stress. So how we normally realize things are 1 year ago, with trauma we don't realize that, are because the memory is not stored in that way. It's not stored in the way that it can place it in this historical life context. Yeah. Okay. So I will give a short example related to conflict related sexual violence. Yeah. How it works in a survivor. So if you can go to the next slide. For instance, somebody who is a survivor of conflict-related sexual violence later on is maybe at a sports school, and they hear somebody breathing loudly. Or just they're somewhere where somebody is breathing loudly after sport. So they're out of breath, right? But immediately for this person, the rape comes to mind. Yeah. And then if we go to the next one, you hear that perpetrator breathe. You hear him breathe. Maybe next one. Yes. And again, the next one. So immediately the person feels terrified and everything starts. Heart is beating fast. The person feels weak in the legs. So these are the bodily signs. And the person is thinking, I will die. Yeah. And this person is just outside somewhere hearing somebody breathe loudly. Yeah. It's not even somebody approaching that person. It's only hearing the sound. You hear that person, the perpetrator breathing, you feel terrified, your heart is beating, you have weak legs, and you think I will die. So this is how how PTSD, what is at the core of PTSD. And I will talk a bit more about that if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so everything starts up. Yes. So I cannot move, there's shame. Again, you feel the pressure on your hands, maybe like you feel that physically from when it happened. And if we go to the next slide, we can see, but it's without the context. Yeah, it is without the knowledge that it happens in November. It was in the village. If you can go to the next one, it was spring, wearing a blue dress. All this information about the rape you don't have access to. So it's happening now again. Yeah. Okay. Then we'll move on to more slide. I think this one we spoke about already, so we can go to the next one. Because I realize many of you might already be very familiar with the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder, but I will quickly go through it. So we have four core elements: the intrusion, avoidance, hyperarousal, and cognition. And so the intrusion, so we can understand that also now from the memory dysfunction perspective on PTSD, right? And so the intrusions, yes, of course, we're having intrusions because like we just saw from the example, right? Like, so it's coming. There is no, it's easily triggered to remember those things, and they easily become into your mind, and they can feel very vivid and very real because they're not contextualized. And then, of course, people start to avoid places that trigger them, that remind them, that make them feel fearful of re-victimization, or because the sense of safety that's been damaged. And then we have the hyperarousal. This is really, the body still being in that high state of alert. And you can again understand that, right? Like if you get easily triggered, all this fast heartbeat, looking around you, feeling anxious, sense of safety being threatened, of course, the hyperarousal is going to be there because the body doesn't get a chance to unwind, because it's constantly being reminded, being triggered of what happened. And the body is constantly saying, well, careful, it's happening again, careful, careful, careful. So, people are very tense. And then there are the cognitions. And I think, we spoke a bit about that. And you also gave it in your answer. So people will have, very low expectations about themselves, about the world, loss of trust, social isolation, all these things because of the cognitions that are with the associated with the trauma. Okay, we can move many slides ahead actually we can talk about all of this, so we can move ahead to the slides with the QR codes, please. Yeah, we spoke about that. One more. Yes, thank you. So this is a short introduction into this thinking, and those of you who have done the narrative exposure training with us have also heard more about this. But here's some further reading about this. Yeah, so these three articles are really great ones in explaining this idea of the memory and how it plays a role in PTSD development and also maintaining PTSD diagnosis. Yeah, so these are great. And some of these are about specifically about sexual trauma as well, and how it plays into that. And I've also added one that talks about combat-related PTSD, because I think it can be very relevant to the people you work with in this moment. So next off, I want to take you a bit into what are options for treatments. Yeah, so we've talked a bit about what do survivors of conflict-related sexual violence experience in their families, in their social functioning, but also on an individual level, and how are their memories stored, and how do those interact with their trauma complaints. And next up, I want to share you a little bit more about what we know about treatment for survivors. And if we can go to the next slide with the pyramid. One more. Yes, thank you. Sorry. So my main focus today will be on specialized services, and but I do want to give, acknowledge and give credit that like the focused non-specialized supports and community and value supports, as we saw from these, these layers, are incredibly important, and it's incredibly needed that support is broadly recognized on those layers, as well as identifying survivors, referring survivors. That's really why those layers are absolutely crucial in the conflict-related sexual violence response. But given the time that we have and my expertise as well, I will be focusing on the specialized services today, with full credit to those other layers as well. So first, we talked a little bit about the aftermath, and I want to, before we dive a bit deeper into the trauma, I first want to take a little sidestep and speak a little bit more about the male survivors of sexual violence, if you have a moment. And I saw actually a really nice comment by, is it Natalia? Natalia, yes. She said, let me find it. Oh, there were many comments. She said there are 300 survivors of, here it is. There are more than 300 survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and the majority of them are men. So thank you, Natalia, for sharing that. I think that's very crucial information. So thank you. And all the more reason to specifically talk a bit about male survivors, right? Because well, rightfully so, a lot of the research and focus has been on women, of course, and I think there's good reason for that, because this is what we know from, let's say, worldwide numbers and numbers that we have in times of peace. But I think especially in in times of war, and also what we see indeed from some reports we're getting about Ukraine, the amount of male survivors is immense, and it's important that we don't that means we have to consider what might their particular needs be, right? If you see what I mean. So in general, what we know is male survivors are less likely to disclose conflict-related sexual violence or seek help. This is something we know from other settings and from studies. And it's because of reasons that we discussed, right? So, there might be stereotypical ideas about sexual violence. Males may also be questioning what happened to me. It's maybe also used in the context of military action, so it has a different layer to it, to what people maybe generally consider to be sexual violence. And of course, you have to inform me actually about how you view it from a Ukrainian perspective. But what we see from Ukrainian people coming here, but also from people from other countries, is that we see there is a strong cultural norm about men don't need help, men need to solve it themselves, and that can hinder help seeking. And what we have here, for instance, at our center, is we have male groups of survivors. So it's males with male helpers, so male mental health professionals and male survivors together in group therapy, having peer support sessions. And I think, of course, a lot of knowledge that we have in general about conflict-related sexual violence can be relevant for men as well, but it's also important to be mindful of what maybe particular needs of for men. And I've seen actually that being together among males, between themselves and sharing that they've experienced this and sharing the way in which it occurred, the sexual violence, but also the aftermath and some of the questions that it raises around your identity as a man and masculinity. It's so important to speak about this among your own gender and with male helpers as well. So that is something to consider. I guess especially also in Ukraine, when we know there are such big numbers of male survivors of sexual violence. For what we know, like it's harder for male survivors to maybe disclose and seek help, and because of that, of course, the symptoms worsen. And it's important to tackle awareness and stereotypes around service providers, because they might not recognize, right? Like a doctor and a man comes in and he's showing certain symptoms or he's sharing certain problems, and if it was a female, the doctor might consider, oh, maybe this is a survivor of sexual violence, but then when it's a male, it may not come to mind as quickly. So there is an option for improvement, maybe I would say, and the same for law enforcement. There is an opportunity there, I could say. I'm trying to find one slide.
Ріно, можна, будь ласка, питання з чату?
There is one question from the chat. Do you know in which countries there are shelters for CRSV male survivors?
Yes, thank you. There are, actually, we have them in the Netherlands, we do. Also for survivors of sexual exploitation, male survivors of sexual exploitation. And I'm not aware in Ukraine, but I'm sure between Sergei and me, we can maybe find out some information about this, and also through the network. So we are also partnering with Mukwege Foundation, the Nobel Prize winner I told you about in the beginning, his organization, and also his Ukrainian section. We are also partnering with them and developing training materials for them. So for sure, I can reach out and ask for the Ukrainian context if I know. And I will share that information with Sergei. I don't know on the top of my head, but I hope they are. I don't know if that answers your question or there was something else related to that question. Maybe you can leave in the chat if there's a follow-up. Otherwise, we'll continue. Is that okay, Sergei?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that question. So last time I told you a bit about Judith Herman, and I can definitely recommend her works. Her works on trauma, and she's published a book recently that is about the social recognition, the importance of social recognition after trauma. And one of her main focus areas is about sexual trauma as well. And she recognizes 3 stages of recovery for survivors of sexual violence. And it's something we follow as well within our team, where we see survivors of sexual violence worldwide, who are based now in the Netherlands. And so these 3 stages are, the first one is safety and stabilization. So here we develop skills and tools for emotional stability and a physical sense of safety. Then there is remembrance and mourning. So this is where the traumatic processing comes into place. And the third one is integration and connection. So it's about, after trauma processing, how am I going to live my life right? How am I going to restore the trust that was broken? Maybe I want to have a relationship. I will quickly break down these different layers. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we do in our center, so I'm just listing you some options that you might consider in the setting that you work in. Yeah, and I would be very happy to expand on any of these if you leave some questions in the chat, or you can also connect to me at a later point if you're interested to learn more. So what we do with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence is, first of all, provide psychoeducation. I think that's a very crucial one. And our psychoeducation for the survivors, well, it's a general one. First of all, of course, about self-care, good sleeping habits, but also discussing, what emotions might you experience? What is the function of these emotions? So I think those are quite general, but the things we discussed that are particular for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence is about this freeze reaction that we spoke about, so the tonic immobility. So we give psychoeducation about that without going into their own experience of trauma yet. But what we find is that when you mention these things, it already opens up the space for people to reflect on that. Like, okay, I think that's what happened to me during the sexual violence. I froze and I couldn't say anything. And by giving the theory of it, it already, excuses the person for what has happened. It gives them, it takes away the blame from them. So I think getting some of these things out of the way, but also the disgust that we just spoke about. So sometimes people tell me, I shower maybe 20 times a day, but I still feel dirty. I wash my hands constantly, but I still feel dirty. And they don't understand. They don't like, I must be crazy. I don't know. Nobody does this. This is me. I'm totally a crazy person. And then I explain, we see this a lot. This feeling of disgust is what we see a lot with people who have experienced sexual violence. And it's a wake-up call for people. Oh, I never made that connection because it's just showering. For me, it was not clear that it was related to the sexual violence. And yes, we hear this a lot. So these acts of trying to cleanse yourself, but also small acts of control that I spoke about a little bit. It also, anxiety also has a little bit to do with that, right? Like, so all the closets door need to be closed. So it's a bit particular. These little compulsive conticular behaviors, and there can be a way of regaining control over your life. So again, we explain this could be related to that. We see that also a lot in sexual violence survivors. But also avoiding places, avoiding men. Yes, sometimes the link is not so clear to people. So we talk a lot about that during psychoeducation, and it helps also for the later stages that people are aware of the connections between their symptoms and the sexual violence. Then actually throughout, so from the beginning, but also throughout, we have body-oriented therapies and grounding techniques. Yeah, so as you can imagine, and as we discussed already, the reliving of what has happened is very strong in people. Yeah, so, and when that happens, for instance, I'm seeing a woman now who has a lot of night terrors. She has a lot of nightmares, and she wakes up and she's in bed and she cannot fall asleep again. She's too triggered, too emotional, and it's really hard for her to calm herself down. So what we're doing is we're working with that, for instance. What can you do to calm your body down again? How can you ground yourself? So for her, she's very severe case, I would say. So for her, she really could not move. She was really frozen in her bed after a nightmare. So we made on her wall, we made these things she can say to herself that are helpful, like I'm safe, I'm safe. So we put it on her walls next to her bed. So this is a way. And then we put like breathing exercises that she can do in her bed, because for her, she really couldn't get out of bed for a long time. So this is an example, but there are many more of techniques, also standing techniques that help people. Basically, the whole point is to deregulate after being so triggered and dysregulated because of remembering what has happened. And for survivors as well, like sometimes a memory comes, but sometimes it's only the body. All of a sudden, people feel so fearful and they don't even understand why. It just happens. Yeah. So how can you deregulate that? So that's also going into psychoeducation, of course, and learning some techniques. Yeah. So that's also related to the emotion regulation training. Then we have art-based therapies that can be very useful as well for survivors of sexual violence, especially the ones that were quite young when it happened, but for everybody. I think what is very particular as well, again, same for a lot of trauma, but also very particular for conflict-related sexual violence, is that it's really hard to formulate the words for it. Yeah. So a big part of it is that as well. It's so shameful, in a way, it relates to sexuality, of course, and it's very shameful for people to speak about their body parts, to speak about things that were done with their body that are sexual as well. It's different than somebody, maybe attacking you with a knife. It's less shameful to talk about that. It's, people who have trauma maybe from a car accident. It's absolutely horrible and it's absolutely fearful, but it's not shameful like sexual violence is shameful. So I think this shameful element of sexual violence is a very particular one compared to other trauma survivors. Yeah, so it's about your intimate parts, and people don't. Yeah, in general, we don't discuss about this. Of course, it's private. It's not something it's easy to talk about what happened in those areas. And their arts-based therapy is very helpful. People can express themselves without needing to say everything into the words. Yeah, so, but maybe also express complex emotions that are so difficult to put into words. But you can make a drawing or a painting about it, or you can use clay to express that. Yeah, so we use that as an addition because so much cannot be said or expressed in words, especially for conflict-related sexual violence. And then very practically, because this phase is also really there to support the second phase, so we make a network overview and safety plan. That's a very important step. So we try to see who is in your network. Maybe there's a partner, maybe there's a good friend, maybe there's other family members. Who can support you? Who knows about what happened to you? Are they a supportive person or are they not a supportive person? If things will start to go badly with you, maybe there will be substance abuse, maybe there will be suicide. Is there somebody we can call? Because it's also for us to be safe. So when we start this really intense process of healing, we also need to make sure there is a safety net around this person, because it can be a really difficult trajectory and we need the support. And we always talk about suicide prevention. So we talk about, of course, we need to have an idea of the risk. Are people considering this? Are they having plans? And if so, how can we make that safety net also work there, right? So, because going into treatment to process conflict-related sexual violence is a challenging process. So we need that safety net also to tackle any risk of suicide. And maybe there will be medication. That's also something we do in the pre-phase, let's say the safety and stabilization phase. We see maybe there's support needed for sleep, so we find the medication there. And like I discussed already for the men, we try to offer as much as this as possible in peer support groups or even by peer trainers. So we train also people with lived experience to provide these options. And our experience is that in the beginning nobody wants that. They was like, no, I want individual. I don't want to talk to other people. I won't like it. They won't understand me. I don't like to be around other people. And as we can see from our discussion before, there's so much, the trust in the other is lost. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of shame. So everybody is isolated in their own, experience and thinks it's unique. Also, I think it's only me who is going through this. And actually, we really encourage to take that step to be in a group. And we can find from usually day one that it's so supportive to people. They're going, oh, you have this too? Really? I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one. Okay. And, of course, it's not always goes 100% perfect, but most cases it's really supportive and really helpful. And people can even get friendships from this, right? They can find the support from each other also in the difficult times during treatment, for instance. So yeah, I can also really encourage that. Okay. Questions about these so far?
Ріно, тільки одне питання в чаті
There is
бачу.
only one
Чи
question in
можна
the
до вас
chat
звертатися
whether
за
it is
допомогою
possible
розробці
for
навчальних
participants
матеріалів,
to
грантів,
reach out to
убезпечення для
you to
організації?
develop learning materials, teaching materials for the organization.
Yes, for sure. I will leave it's the contact information for me is in the slides, but I can also put it in the chat. You're very welcome to reach out. And I know that through the WHO help desk, we're also providing trainings. And I know there's also some space to see if we can further develop supportive materials. It will have to be through the discussion with the WHO, of course, but we're very open and happy to support according to the need from this group. Okay, then maybe to the next slide. Yeah, so here I've listed some trauma-focused therapies that, at least for us, but also for other organizations, they have experience with doing this with sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence survivors. I must say very honestly, there's not so much evidence for particular for conflict-related sexual violence survivors. Okay, so we cannot really say this is the best treatment for conflict-related sexual violence survivors, and especially we cannot say it for Ukraine or any other context. So that's the disclaimer I'm giving. But these therapies have a lot of evidence-based for traumatized populations in general. And I can say in our center, we have really good experience with this for conflict-related sexual violence experience for survivors. Okay, so yeah, that's the background to this list. So first of all, we work a lot with narrative exposure therapy, and I see some of the people in the group have been trained by us before and maybe through other organizations in that. I will say something more about that one in a moment. So I will skip that one for now, but it's a trauma-focused therapy. And then many of you have probably heard of EMDR. That's another option. Yeah, it's also, I would say, quite a lot of evidence in working with people with sexual violence. So it's a recommended therapy. And a very well known, of course, is cognitive behavior therapy. It has many forms and many focus areas, but including also trauma focused and also for sexual violence survivors. There are good experiences. Then there is imaginary exposure treatment. And there's also very good experience with in working with survivors of sexual violence, but not so much in conflict settings, or war settings. And then there is schema therapy. I will say a little bit more about that one. There are different ways to do it, but the way we do it is in a group, and it's quite a long therapy, so it takes maybe 1 year to do. And it's really about cognitions and early patterns. So it's about this last category in PTSD that we spoke about. It zooms really into that. So the ideas of the world is not safe, I'm not a good person, maybe I'm cursed. And it speaks about how the traumatic experience evoked that, but also how early patterns, for instance, things you've learned in the relationship with your parents or in the family you grew up in, which kind of ideas and which kind of roles. And it really unpacks this. And this is a really nice, intensive treatment to really change some behavior patterns. So usually we do this with people who are really having difficulty in this interpersonal part, right? Who are really struggling to build friendship, to build relationships, and have trust in others, are really stuck in that way. So that's one we do also. And then there is sensory motor therapy, and that one is very much related to movement and related to when we talk about in the case of sexual violence. For instance, one of the things they do is, I wouldn't say reenact, that sounds too strong, but they really focus on what the body went through during the sexual trauma. So for instance, they talk about, okay, which position were you in when the sexual violence took place? And maybe your body was frozen at this time, but what would you have liked to do? Well, I would have liked to kick that person or hit that person and push them away from me, but I couldn't, my body was frozen. So in the sensory motor therapy, they do this. So they call it like finishing a frozen movement. So I wanted to do this. Okay, so do it now in the treatment. So, and we can see from experience that gives a lot of release to people. Like, I finally was able to finish the movement I really wanted to do, but I couldn't in that moment. And it also speaks a lot about, again, regulation of the body, rebuilding that relationship to the body that we talked about in the beginning, that the relationship to the body is so broken. Some people don't feel so much. Like they just eat because it's behavioral. They're like, okay, now it's lunch, I have to eat, but they never feel the need. They don't feel the hunger, and when they eat something, they don't taste. And so this is an example of being so disconnected from the body. You don't notice your basic bodily cues. So you also don't notice your boundaries. Right? You just go, go, go. You don't feel. So this is something that sensory motor therapy taps into. And then when you see this long list, and there are many more, right? But maybe if we go to the next slide, the question arises like, okay, but which one to choose? Okay, so I don't know. Do I choose this treatment? Do I choose that treatment? Do I do them all at the same time? And like I said, like from the evidence, honestly, I can't really tell you like that in the terms of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine. I can't tell you. You have to do this one. And it really depends on the person. This is how we choose. Also, we explain to people all the options. We give them information about the treatments, and we see, well, which one speaks to you? Which one do you think can be helpful to you? But it also depends on the therapist, of course. Maybe there's one you feel comfortable in, you have good experience with in working with survivors. Sometimes it can also depend on the type of person. For instance, you have somebody who really likes the idea of making a narrative of their story, or you can have somebody who's like, I don't want to talk too much. I want to be working more with the body. So there are different options. They can all be beneficial. And sometimes we also use two, maybe not at the same time. I would not recommend that, but maybe first one, then the other. Yeah, so this is all practice-based experience, I would say, on how to and when to deliver which therapy. Then if we can go to the next slide, because the most important thing about all these therapies, I would say, is they all have an element of exposure in it. And that's, to me personally, if you ask me, is the working element in the common working element in all these therapies. Yeah, and then they all have each have their own how do you say, color to it, their own approach and their own method. But the core of what they are doing, I think, is quite similar for all these therapies, most of these therapies. So it's the idea of exposure, right? And exposure to the memory. Yeah, we talked about memory. So what you do is most people tell us, like, I just want to forget what happened to me. Give me the pill, give me the magic wand, and I will forget what happened. And that's my biggest wish. Well, it's not possible. We don't have that pill. But what we do know that works is that you have to go to the memory. But for people instinctively, that's the most difficult thing, right? Yeah? So to remember the conflict-related sexual violence is people do everything they can to avoid thinking about it. And then in trauma treatment, that is what you do. You move to the trauma, and that's the exposure part. That's why we call it exposure. So you expose yourself to the traumatic memory. And so there are different ways to do that, but that's always at the core. And what is the expectation? You can see from the first arrow, people get when you ask them, oh, remember the day when you were when the sexual violence happened? The anxiety goes up, up, up. You can see that by the first arrow, right? People might also say things in the meeting like, oh, I want to leave, and then their expectation is, that's the second arrow, is that they will die. Really, it will happen again. I cannot handle it. I cannot remember what happened. The anxiety will increase, go up, 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 until I will just die. And that's not what happens. Yeah? And that's actually the learning part. So as you can see from the lines below, the black lines, it will go down because you won't die from remembering something, right? The bad thing happened in the past. Yeah, it's not happening now. So the expectation is it will go up. And then once you do it, once you expose yourself to it, people experience, no, the tension goes down. And that relief of that is the working element of many of these treatments. Yeah. And then after time, so you can see there are 4 lines. So sometimes we repeat that, we repeat it again, we repeat it again, we repeat it again. And every time the fear goes down and more down and more down and more down. And so that's the idea of exposure therapies. Yeah, and then there are different forms, but this is the core idea. And maybe to say a little bit about who, yes, because I know we have a diverse audience today. So in general, it depends on the type of treatment. Yeah. So for most of them, it requires a qualified psychologist or qualified psychiatrist or qualified counselor. There are some options that are can be done by lay counselors. There are some treatments and also those supported by the WHO. But all of them require a level of training and expertise. Yeah, so it's not something from this webinar that you could take and start to do with survivors. It really requires more extensive training, of course, and also more time to discuss, okay, what can happen in people, what to do when a person dissociates, for instance. So this requires training and time, of course. So I'm just explaining the theory, but it's not enough to do any type of trauma treatment. That's important to remember. If we can go to the next slide, you see the time is also going. I thought 3 hours so long, but the time is flying actually. I talk a little bit more about what is specific, right, for conflict-related sexual violence survivors. So I think we talked a little bit about the stigma, the shame and disgust, and it's very internalized. So it's something projected into yourself. And I think in the psychoeducation, it's very important to acknowledge all of these. So to acknowledge that there's shame, that people might have rejected you, that you can feel this disgust, you can blame yourself. For me, when I start to work with people, I always just discuss all of this from the beginning. Even maybe for some it's very true, for some it's less true. I say everything so that it's out there, right? It's recognized, it's said. People can know that you know about it, that you have a word for it, and that it's okay to speak about these things. That's already very helpful. Atomic immobility I mentioned, we talked a little bit about that. Arousal non-concordance, it's from the last webinar. I mentioned it. Also this humiliation, the first person, if you remember that we read the quote, talked about this, right, from the report. He said about humiliation. It is very often, and also very often in men, something that stagnates the treatment, because people are not there. It is humiliation things that took part. They are so fearful and reluctant to say it that they start to hide it, and it kind of blocks the treatment from working. So I speak about these examples, and well, some people are then maybe being forced to be nude, people are laughing at them, or they're forced to do really shameful, strange things. People are afraid to talk about it, but also things like when it happened, I wet myself, like I peed myself. These things happen a lot, but people are so ashamed to say this, and sometimes by asking about it, they're like, oh, yes, that happened to me, but I was just like, I couldn't say it. It was too painful, too difficult. So putting a lot of things out there can help the person to support to disclose. Of course, now in Ukraine and in many settings, there is an ongoing threat and sense of unsafety. So this is important to talk about as well, right? It's not like we try to say as trauma therapists, like it's over, you're safe now. But when we're working in ongoing situation of war, it's not you're safe now, it's over. No, there is the risk, and we have to be also honest and acknowledge that, because that is on people's minds, of course. It can happen again, it can happen tomorrow, it can happen to somebody I love. So it's very important to also address the heavy burden of living in a time of war. Of course, the social consequences we talked about, and they are also important to recognize in the treatment. And structural inequality we talked about as well. And so it can be through like ethnicity or a certain religion, or through your gender, or through your sexual identity, that people violence was done against them. And it's important to also recognize that dynamic in the treatment. So finally, we have the third stage. If we can go to the next slide. And there we really talk about, okay, what's next? So how can we move from this to living a full life again. And sometimes we say to survivors, like, it's from surviving to living your life, right? Like, I've just been surviving since this, but now I want to live a life, like a complete life, a full life. So there are different ways we do that. Sometimes it means connecting to a religious leader or spiritual leader. To also, many people have these big questions, right? Like, why me? Why does this happen? Why did God give me this faith? And these questions are really something nice to discuss with a spiritual or religious leader. But also reconnecting to the body, we spoke about that, and to intimacy. We have several modules that talk about, how can you maybe be intimate with your partner again after sexual violence? How can you do that in a way that's also meaningful to you, and it's not just, oh, I have to do this for the person I love, but it's also something you can want and enjoy if you like. Then the third one is something I developed as part of my PhD research. It's called the SAFE module, and it's a very practice-based and body-based intervention about feeling and staying safe in daily life. So many people have this great sense of unsafety after sexual violence, and this module really goes into how to break those barriers in daily life. Seven Roses is about recovery. It's also something we've trained a lot in Ukraine. Vocational training can be part of it, also to rebuild a life after that, and income, arts-based therapy again. And of course, also including the system and the family, the couple. Sometimes we ask the partner, the spouse, into the session at the end and maybe discuss together what has happened, what is also their experience, because it's also really hard for the spouse if your loved one is going through this, or for the family. So we also give space for that. And if we can go to the next slide, this is the link to the article I wrote that is about the SAFE module that I just talked about. It's about regaining a sense of safety after sexual violence. And this is the study about it, if you're interested to read it. And also I'm happy to share that as a resource if people would like. So next I want to shortly say something. Well, no, I'm not going to do that actually. So next I want to say something about narrative exposure therapy, because that's really a method that goes into this idea of the memories being restored, and what you do in this narrative exposure therapy. So it's a trauma focused therapy, and you integrate these hot and these cold parts of the memory. But I'm looking at the clock, and I want to. You will get the slides, and information is there. There's also, if you go to the next slide, sorry, there's the code also to more training about that, and the manual. And you will find in the slide some little more information about it. And if you want to move ahead a few slides here, to I think slide 89. So this you can find. Yeah, this one. So here is some further recommended reading as well. So this is about these are the systematic reviews that are out there about mental health and psychosocial support for survivors of gender-based violence in armed conflict and conflict-related sexual violence. So this is, I would say, the latest evidence base that we have about treatment. And if we can go to almost the last slide, I think it's slide 92. Yeah, this one, because I quickly want to say before we sign off, all of us, is that there are some upcoming trainings. So this narrative exposure therapy training is happening also by me end of May, and there will be some supervisions as well. But these are for a selected group of participants, and the organization of that will go through the WHO. On the selection, but it will be provided. There will also be some staff support from ARC International, and there will be a few upcoming webinars as well, like this one. So one is about veterans and their family. It's May 27th. And one on traumatic grief, that is July 15th. And we're still planning one on substance abuse. So those are upcoming. In the final slide, you will find my email and also our organizational website. But I want to leave a little bit of space for final questions. Oh, yeah, that's I think you passed it already. Yeah. Sorry. Go back, it's slide 93.
Читаю чат, вибачте, паралельно просто
Sorry,
в особисті
I'm
повідомлення з
trying
чату
to read
пишуть.
the
Так,
chat.
загальнодоступні. Як потрапити на
So,
вебінари
how
та тренінги? Чи буде
to
розсилка з
attend
реєстрації?
the webinars
Напевно, на
and
це
trainings,
питання я
whether we
надам
will
відповідь.
receive the
Взагалі, ми
emails for
повідомляємо про
registration.
тренінги, про
In
наші
general,
активності.
we are
Нашому
informing people
перший
about
канал
our
комунікації
trainings or
телеграм-чат, другий
activities in
сайт, третій
Telegram
розсилка на
chat on
пошту.
different
Вам
sites, and
сьогодні
we
або
send
завтра,
emails
коли
to
я отримаю
your
запис, надійде
emails.
запис матеріалу
Tomorrow you
сьогоднішнього
will
вебінару,
receive the
і там будуть
recording of
посилання на всі
today's
канали
webinar,
комунікації.
and
Раджу вам
you
долучитися, ми
will
будемо вас
receive the
оперативно
links to
повідомляти.
these communication channels.
Так, наступне
The
питання.
next question is
схожі.
the
Так,
same.
тобто,
So,
очікуйте, будь ласка, на повідомлення на
you
пошту, там
just
будуть
need
усі
to wait
відповідні
for
посилання.
an email with all the links.
Я бачу одразу повідомлення від
And
технічної підтримки, що
there is
запис, скоріше за
a
все,
request from the
буде
technical
завтра,
support
тобто
that the
достатньо довго
recording will be
провантажується.
available
Ну, запис
most likely
викладений на YouTube, і
tomorrow.
також
We
повідомлення
will
про зворотній зв'язок, ми
post
пошлемо вам
this
посилання на YouTube.
recording on YouTube channel, and then we will send you the link.
Yeah. Are there more questions for me? Happy to answer. I just left my email in the chat. It's also on at the end of the PowerPoint, so you'll find it there.
Just many thanks for such an interesting and meaningful webinar.
You're very welcome.
Я зараз, вибачте, будь ласка, щоб
Sorry,
можливо не чекати завтрашнього
in order not
повідомлення
to
саме
wait
про матеріали та
for
презентації, я вас
the
дуже попрошу,
tomorrow's email,
можливо,
I
зараз з
would
чату скопіювати
ask
це
you kindly
посилання.
to
Ми завжди після
copy
кожного
this
вебінару
link
проводимо
every time after
оцінку
each
щодо цього
webinar.
вебінару.
We
Пройдіть, будь ласка,
assess
дану
every
форму,
webinar,
щоб ми
so
отримали
please
від вас зворотній зв'язок.
send
Я вас надсилаю.
can you fill
Так?
out this form so that we receive the feedback from you?
І дуже вам дякую.
And thank you very much.
Yeah, have a blessed Easter. Yes, thank you, Natalia. And you too, everybody. Yeah, I'm very happy to hear you found it meaningful. Of course, it's always, preparing this from a distance and not being with you physically. It's always, like a bit of a question how it lands with you and if it's meaningful. But I'm happy to hear your positive feedback, and feel free to reach out if there's any follow-up question or something to share. Like I said, also I'm really interested to learn from your context, and if you have any resources to share, it would be very nice as well to meet like that around this topic, because there's just still so much to do, right? In general, but also in Ukraine. I think we will learn a lot, unfortunately, about this issue, and also how to support survivors in the best way.
Наразі, Ріно, питань у чаті саме стосовно вебінару не
Rina,
бачу.
there are no
Тому зараз ми
questions
ще
regarding
трішечки
webinar.
почекаємо,
Yes.
We will
поки,
wait
можливо, хтось
for a
скопіює або
bit
заповнить форму зворотнього
until
зв'язку, і
people fill out
можемо
the feedback
зараз
form,
починати.
and after that, we will be able to
Ще раз
conclude
нагадую,
our
що
meeting.
всі презентації,
I
які
would
були
like to
використані
emphasize
протягом
that
вебінару,
all the
будуть надіслані
presentations
вам.
will be sent to your emails.
Okay, I will be signing off. And thank you so much for your attention. And thank you so much, Sergey and Tatiana, for the great support during this webinar and the technical support. Sergey, do you need anything else from me to share the resources tomorrow? I think you have everything from my side, right?
Так. Я, в принципі, вважаю, що ми
Yes,
можемо
in
закінчувати.
principle, I think
Тому
that we can
будемо
wrap it
потрошки
up.
від'єднуватися. Бажаю всім
So we
учасникам і
will
вам,
sign
Ріно,
off. I
гарного
wish
дня і дуже
everyone
дякую
a
за вашу
great day,
участь.
and
А
thank
вам,
you very
Ріно, за
much
дуже
for your
змістовний, корисний
participation
вебінар.
for such an interesting and meaningful webinar.
Super. Thank you. Wishing you a very good day there.
Мгм.
Bye.
Побачення.